An army color scheme is something sacred, usually written in stone. But maybe it shouldn't be. With my Black Templars collection, I've always had the same colors, a lot of black, a little bit of off-white, a little bit of red, but I've left the door open to exactly how I get those paints applied, and it has led to some really fun discoveries, like my angelic suppressors in crispy white armor to show that they're angelically dropping from the sky to unleash their autocannons. And my 50-50 color scheme on my Centurion warsuits, 50% black, 50% white, all Centurion all the time. I love these guys. And just being willing to be flexible has led my Space Marines to start out in high school looking like this, and eventually through trial and error, evolving all the way into this. This is an intercessor I painted a couple of years ago, but this is essentially exactly how I like to paint my Marines nowadays. This evolution has led my Black Templar army to look better and better and better and better as the years go on, but it has made things a little bit awkward sometime. I'm talking about these assault intercessors. These are the Indomitus assault intercessors, and they're fine, but they were right on the line in between me using primer black and then a little bit of dry brushing for all the armor and contrast paints. Also, these guys are an example of before I even knew about the sewing pins, I actually built the little nails out of Plasticar that go into the skulls. A bunch of them broke, and so I've already replaced a few of them with my now classic sewing straight pins. But I don't reach for these guys very often to play with. And the only reason really is they're not exactly the right color. Which is a dumb reason. These guys look great. I did a bunch of kitbashing and converting. They're pretty much my modern Templars. But it was just a couple of months before I figured out the contrast paint recipe that is on all my new Templars, and so they're just not quite right. But they're close enough that I think I can just kind of shimmy them over the finish line and get them up to snuff. To get these guys up to snuff, step one was knocking 5 years of dust off of them with a big old dry brush. These are push fit minis, and the Sergeant's chainsword arm never got glued, it's still floppy. I threw some glue on there to get that permanently attached. When I was putting these guys' bases together, I was experimenting with using aluminum foil to build up the material. This sorta worked, but not really. And the Sergeant in particular has continued to fall off the base again and again, so I drilled a 1mm hole into his foot and properly pinned him down into the plastic with some brass rod. Now he will permanently be attached. And for good measure, I dripped in a lot of ultra thin super glue. Then I fixed up the broken chunks of sand around his foot with a little sand texture paste. A few of these guys were looking a little precarious as well. This guy is wiggling far too much for comfort. So I flipped him upside down and drilled right through the base, up through the tinfoil and into his foot, shoving a nice long pin in there. I did this to everybody. Nothing worse than turn one in a tournament, having your guy fall off the base. While I was cleaning these guys up, I broke off another of my Plasticar nails, so I replaced it with a sewing straight pin, drilling a hole the same diameter and sinking in a fresh bit. I think they look better anyway. All of the skulls throughout my Templars army are from the Citadel Skulls box, but this little skeleton that is crucified up here is actually from the Warlord Games Knights of Erewhon box. The Knights of Erewhon Skeleton Archers. It's the only way I know to get really nice plastic, plain skeletons. Actually, I think I'm just about out, so I might need to get another one of those boxes soon. But now I want to go through these guys and try to give each one of them a little something new, a little something special. Looking at my favorite Templars artwork, the cover art from the 5th edition Codex, I love the shield nailed down to the shoulder pad, so I want to try to make one of those. I grabbed a shoulder shield from the Assault Intercessors box, and then I stuck it down to some putty so I can sand it a little thinner than it really is. Then I dremeled a little ditch in the shoulder and plastic glued it on. I didn't get it perfectly straight, but I bet with some paint on there it won't be noticeable. The other big thing that's seen in old Templars artwork is the little shields all over. To make these, I've been sticking some extra green stuff when I make too much onto my paint bottles so that I end up with a nice flat, rounded pieces. I used some scissors to cut out some little squares, and I trimmed these into the rough shape of the shields, using some tweezers to hold them and a little sanding twig to get them perfect. I really like how they turned out, but they're not very rounded. I think next time I'll stick the green stuff to skinnier paint bottles like this Army Painter one. Now to attach these, I grabbed some little jewelry chain. I found this at the arts and crafts store. I've had no luck buying little chain online. I need to see it in person to know if it'll work or not. I carefully strung this around my Marine's neck, poking and prodding it into shape and using some ultra thin super glue to lock it down permanently. Ultra thin super glue helps with this so it doesn't gum up in between the links. Then I took one of my little shoulder shields and glued it in the middle, and then I used the other like a regular shoulder shield, just a little bit smaller than the Games Workshop one, so there's some variety in the squad. I'm really getting into redecorating these guys. I love adding in skulls and chains and decorations. It reminds me of the Catacombs of the Blessed Dead. We have been getting deep into Trench Crusade here at EonsOfBattle, and this has accumulated in our most ambitious project ever, our first ever campaign, The Catacombs of the Blessed Dead, a collaboration between EonsOfBattle and Trench Crusade for digital and physical terrain. Delve beneath the ruined earth to find the Catacombs, a labyrinth of deadly corridors and claustrophobic hallways studded with the bones of the blessed men and women who have fallen in holy war. This officially licensed terrain pack includes everything you need to recreate this dangerous modular maze. We also have original, compatible, resin-cast miniatures, perfect for your grimdark miniature battles. The Trench Sappers and the Grace of Flesh, soldiers and demons locked in eternal conflict. The pre-campaign is up. You can follow the link in the description to see what we're offering and to be the first to know what else is coming. I think some candles would be lovely. I made up some green stuff balls and stole some candles from my epic basing bits. I sanded these flat on the bottom with my Dremel tool and then glued down little balls of green stuff to the shoulders and stuck down my bits, using my hobby knife to make the green stuff look like messy wax strippies. All my Templars backpacks have some skulls, but I also like to throw on as much other decoration as I can. With the green stuff all done, I stuck the extra to a paint bottle and smoothed it out. This will be nice and hard for the next batch of Space Marines I work on. Next, I cut out some purity seals and started sticking these down. I already did one round of extra purity seals when I put these guys together, so they are really tasseled up. A Space Marine can never have too many purity seals. I went ahead and gave each guy one new one. Another thing I like to do is take the scopes from the Intercessor sprue, which you end up with a lot of extras of, and cut these down and glue them to the pistols. It works really well to stick these on the side like the Han Solo blaster, or else make a little trench on top to sink these in just like they are on the bolters. Each Marine is a unique individual. Maybe these guys are really good marksmen, so they like to have a little extra kit for making those trick shots into Nyx Blue Orcs. One thing that's always been a struggle with Black Templars is what to do about the darkness. Black power armor is really cool conceptually, but practically, it can very easily make for unattractive miniatures, especially when I take them to the friendly local game store where the lighting isn't great, because then, a model with really nice subtlety and shading and highlighting can immediately just look like a black miniature. Over the years, I have definitely been pumping up the brightness as much as I can because I'm trying to replicate the Codex cover. Not necessarily like literally what's here, but how it feels. Depicted here are some classic black-clad Space Marines, but the artist went to a lot of effort to try to get a little bit of extra color. There's a little extra gold trim where there wouldn't normally be trim, the light reflecting yellow on their armor, these buildings in the background reflecting yellow, a little extra red in here with these spooky guys carrying this coffin. Like, there's actually quite a bit of color in this artwork. In the back of the book, there's a really nice spread of a proper, lore-accurate Black Templar collection, and individually, each of these guys looks great. But taken as a whole, it kind of just looks like they're primed. It does not have the feeling of the front of the book. I think the trick for good Black Templar is to cheat in as much color as you possibly can. The big thing to fix is the color. My modern Templars are cold blue, not warm black, so I put some white ink in my airbrush and blasted this on, sniping the easy to reach spots. I won't be able to re-zenith all these guys again, but I can touch them up a little. I hit the head, chest, backpack balls, and any arms and legs I could easily reach to get this new highlight. And I varnished over these spots with some Vallejo Mecha varnish to protect it. To get my blue, I took my Black Templar soup, which is a mix of Black Templar, Leviathan blue, and Lamian median contrast paint, and thinned this down. I put this over the armor and it tinted everything just enough to look right. It tinted, but it also darkened, and the Templar crosses on their faces didn't quite make it. That's okay though, they were pretty dark to begin with. I took some white paint onto my best paintbrush and redid these, making them ultra bright white. This is my favorite part. This made me fall in love with the new Primaris helmet because it's really easy to fit these crosses on there. I also touched up the Crusade badges on their knees. They were red and tan before, but super dark. I can definitely bring these up a few notches. And speaking of brightening, same with the shoulder trim. Lore-wise, the trim should be black, but I sneaked some extra color into my Templars making these red. Next up, yellow. I think these were the first Marines I tried out yellow on, and I really like how it looks. It's very blanchy, but my first try was dulled way too much by layers of washes and weathering. I do my yellows much brighter now. To start out, I sanded down these chain swords with my sanding twigs. All the layers of paint have built up a texture that I don't want, so this will knock them back down to a nice flat smooth sword. Then I reprimed these using some bright neutral gray to get these swords bright enough so that the yellow will show up on them. And speaking of that yellow, I base coated the chain swords with a nice yellow. I like demonic yellow from Army Painter. I mixed in a little bit of orange to make a shade around the handle of the sword and a little bit of white paint to get the tip looking nice and shiny. Now it's factory fresh, I want to do some battle damage. I took some white paint onto a piece of foam and sponged this on to get some random irregular shapes. Then I went in with a brush and painted on some dark gunmetal, following the white so it looked like the yellow was getting worn away. I'm actually testing this out on these fellas, and I really like how it looks. I'll have to go back to some of my newer battle brothers and add this on. My Templars are a never-ending cycle of revision and redoing. I don't like everyone to be identical, so on one guy I made his chainsword red, and on another one I did a checkerboard pattern. I started out base coating with a bright gray, and then painted a line in the middle so I had something to work off of as I filled in the checkers. I did the same weathering as on the yellow, and all my boys' chainswords were looking nice. For the heavy bolt pistols, I left some of them red, just pushing the highlights, and on a few, I redid the armor in yellow, base coating a bright neutral gray, and then doing the same base coat shade highlight I did on the swords, finishing them off with a sponging of white paint for some damage. Now I've fixed everything, it's time to hit the new stuff. I started off using some brush on primer to get the first layer on my new bits. Then for the scopes and chains, I put some warm black speed paint over these, and I hit all the purity seals with red, making sure my highlights were pure, bright, saturated red. I dry brushed the scopes and chains with some silver paint, and then I grabbed my Decals. The classic Templar one, and the Black Templar Space Knights decal available from EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find merch like our EOB dice, wet palettes, water slide decals, and basing toppers and bits. It's also the best way to support us with a membership. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This August, we're dropping back into the world of fantasy with some deadly terrain, the Chaotic Cemetery Pack. A series of walls and sculptures depicting the haunting stillness of death and the brutal cruelness of chaos. Made in the shapes and sizes needed for games of Age of Sigmar Spearhead, Sand and Bone. These perilous walls are surrounded by a set of chaotic statues in the Icon of Change, the Likeness of War, the Bust of Decay, and the Effigy of Excess. The Chaotic Cemetery Pack was made by us and is available on our website as STL files or physically printed for you. For the little cross around his neck, I put on a little Templar cross, and for the slightly bigger shoulder shield, I put on a slightly bigger symbol. I love Decals. On the new shoulder shield, I painted it up with yellow and red checkering using all the same colors as on the chainswords, and I wanted to nail this on, but I figured painting it would be easier pre-nail. So now I can drill into it. I drilled right through my paint job and inserted some sewing straight pins, then I put some brush on primer over these and hit them with a gunmetal on the shafts and a silver paint on the heads. To finish up the purity seals, I base coated them with a brown mixed with tan. The tan I use is Pro Acryl Olive Flesh, and I did a few layers of scratchy highlights to get these looking like paper. I can't remember where I read it, but Space Marines consider it an honor where they can finish a mission with their paper seals still intact. These models are starting to look very exciting. And speaking of Space Marines with chainswords, if you're a Black Templar player, these guys are a very useful miniature, because not only are they assault intercessors, which is kind of not a very good Space Marine unit, but if you're a Black Templars player with the new Black Templar supplement, these guys can all of a sudden be having their chainswords +1 to wound and re-rolling the wound, which can get pretty darn spicy for 75 points, which is the cheapest way to run a Space Marine. But if I don't want to play them that way, I could run them as a Crusader squad, Crusaders, in which they're getting sustained hits on those chainswords. And if my opponent was being really generous, they would let me proxy these as Sword Brethren who are getting 6 chainsword attacks apiece. Gotta love a Space Marine with a chainsword. I've been really jealous of other Space Marine close combat armies like World Eaters and Space Wolves, Blood Angels, because they've been better at close combat than the Black Templars for a while, but now with the new codex. Well, let's just say I'm gonna be needing some more Space Marines with chainswords. These models are feeling very spicy. The only thing left is touching up the skulls. I go back and forth on how hard I try on the skulls. Sometimes I'm feeling like being done and just throw some Skeleton Horde contrast paint over them and calling it a day. But sometimes I go in with a few layers of highlights to get them to really glow. I have some time today, so I went all out, even using a little bit of white paint for the brightest spots. I took some special care on the crucified guy. I worked really hard on the kitbash, so it's only right I perfect the paint job. Then for the candles, the gray brush on primer was pretty much perfect. I hit them with a little white paint, a null oil wash, and then some more white paint, finishing off the wicks with a little yellow paint. Those must be some pretty strong burning candles to withstand the heat of battle. I fixed up the nails with some metallic paint, and then the only thing left was the sergeant's face. I've gotten a lot better at faces since painting this guy. I used a really saturated red beige color and glazed this over his noggin. Then mixed in more and more tan paint to do highlights focusing on his temples, cheeks, and the wrinkles where he's screaming. I very carefully picked out his eyes as best I could, and then I actually painted the service stud in his forehead, with a base coat of black and a little dot of white and a little bit more brown in his hair. I touched up the bases where it was broken, mixing my Vallejo earth with black paint to make it like it was never ever broken, and I quickly dry brushed Pro Acryl Olive Flesh over top. Now to protect these boys, I threw on a dusting of Vallejo Mecha Varnish. This is my favorite varnish. It keeps my colors bright and it doesn't dull metallics too much. It also brings all the finishes together so the models look perfect. Then I rimmed up the bases with Apple Barrel gloss black paint, and in a few spots I used a nail file to clean up these base rims a little. They were a little chunky before. These guys have been kicking around in my collection since Indominus, definitely towards the back of my Black Templar shelf. They were just a little bit wrong. They were a little too dark. The colors were very desaturated. They were a little bit dull. They had a bunch of different finishes on them, which made them look a little weird because I was trying out different miniature varnishes, and I didn't go with any of those. Now I like Vallejo Mecha Varnish. But now that I have touched these suckers up, they're like my favorite intercessors. The color on these guys now is absolutely punchy, and they look indistinguishable from my most recent Black Templars. I think I'm initially gonna run these guys as a Crusader squad because I don't have a third proper Crusader squad, but there's also something to just a cheap 5-man Assault Intercessor squad, especially attached to the Emperor's Champion. He's a little more expensive now because he got a lot better and he was already really good. But I wanted to try to keep the points down on my big blobs of Templar goodness because it's very easy for Space Marines for your squads to just get ridiculously expensive, to be like 300 points, 400 points if you're bringing Helbrecht. And that's just a lot of points to put in one squad of Space Marines that could get on the wrong side of like a Forge Fiend and just be gone in one shooting phase. Just 5 cheap and cheerful Space Marines with chainswords. I highly recommend, if you got some old minis or maybe your first minis, get them back out on the painting desk and just start hacking away at them, gluing on new things, putting new paint right over the old paint, incorporating the old paint job into the new one. Because I haven't looked at these guys in years. In fact, I just was thinking about them in my collection. I just knew they were wrong. But now, these guys are the best. These are my current favorite Black Templars until I paint something else, and then that'll be the new favorite. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have any units that could use a little extra attention, a little extra TLC to get them to properly flim your flams. And as always, thanks for watching.